Mötley Crüe was a band built on excess before they even had a dime to their name. Their debut album, Too Fast for Love, was an unpolished slab of sleazy rock and roll, self-released on their own Leather Records in 1981. It was pure Sunset Strip desperation. 4 guys living off scraps, sleeping on floors, scraping together enough money to press vinyl, and selling it hand to hand at their early gigs. And that DIY hustle actually got them noticed. When this distribution company called Green World picked up their distribution, and the album started moving in underground circles, Elektra Records came calling. By the spring of 1982, the Crüe had a record deal, a budget, and a whole new set of problems. The gutter rats were now playing with major label money. However, they really liked to party hardy, and it certainly wasn't going to be slowing down anytime soon. Before they could even get back to LA to start recording the next album, they got themselves kicked off of Kiss's Creatures of the Night tour. It took only 5 shows for Gene Simmons to have finally had enough. And the way he said it was, their bad behavior was out of control. Though given that this was Kiss, a band that built an empire off of hedonism, that accusation carried a certain irony. But Gene Simmons was a businessman first, and if Mötley Crüe was going to upstage the headliners in sheer chaos, they weren't going to last. And the tour bus became their latest crime scene. Non-stop drinking, destruction, and whatever else that they could get away with. Getting booted wasn't a setback, it turned out to be a badge of honor. Mötley Crüe was already cultivating a reputation as rock's most dangerous band, and a little controversy only added fuel to the fire. But when they did make it back to LA, Nikki Sixx had a vision. He had come from a band called Sister, fronted by pre-Wasp Blackie Lawless, and that group dabbled in the occult, using pentagrams and gothic imagery in their stage shows. And Nikki took that aesthetic and ran with it, borrowing the pentagram outright for Lawless's blessing. This wasn't about actual Satanism. Mötley Crüe was all about the shock value of it. But the move would cause an avalanche of outrage when Shout at the Devil hit. The cover art, black, stark, pentagram emblazoned, was like a middle finger to pearl-clutching America. And the album's title itself played into the controversy. It wasn't Shout with the Devil, but that distinction was lost on the moral watchdogs looking for the next battle. Now, the LA rock scene was shifting fast. By the early 80s, metal was splintering. Traditional heavyweights like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden stuck to their new wave of British heavy metal roots. But LA bands were evolving into something flashier, sleazier. Mötley Crüe sat in the eye of that storm. Their music had muscle, driven by Mick Mars's crunching guitars and Tommy Lee's pounding drumming. But it wasn't metal in the same way as Priest or Maiden. It had a bit of punk energy, glam visuals, massive hooks that drew in both guys and girls. The band's look, part Road Warrior, part depraved Hollywood sleaze, made them impossible to ignore. The eyeliner, the leather, the spiked studs. It was a perfect storm of rebellion meeting marketability. And it pissed off exactly the right people. Parents groups, religious organizations, the PMRC, they all took the bait and ran with it. So when the Crüe entered Cherokee Studios in April of 1983, the band definitely had something to prove. Too Fast for Love was a cult success, but this was their shot at real stardom. They brought in producer Tom Worman, who had worked with Cheap Trick and Ted Nugent, guys who knew how to craft big, arena-ready rock records. Mötley Crüe wasn't exactly a polished machine. They were reckless, undisciplined, and fueled by a diet of booze and blow, but they had songs and totally made it work. Inside the band, things were not exactly smooth. They were already eyeing the exit door for Mick Mars. Mars was older than everybody else, by rock standards, practically a dinosaur, and there was talk of bringing in somebody flashier. They're going for somebody like Yngwie Malmsteen. Bob Daisley, Ozzy Osbourne's bass player, overheard the band discussing replacements while on tour, but Mars shut it down. He said, "I'm the guitar player in the band, nobody else needs to be there." Now outside the studio, Nikki Sixx was spiraling. One night, high and reckless, he stole a friend's Porsche and totaled it in a crash that nearly took his arm off. His shoulder was wrecked, and the doctors put him on Percocet. And that little prescription would actually open up a door that he wouldn't be able to close. Heroin was just around the corner, and Sixx would soon find himself on a path that would nearly kill him. Literally. Mötley Crüe still had one foot in the gutter. Their past wasn't far behind them. Just months before, they were broke, eating off dollar menus, crashing wherever they could. Elektra had given them a budget, but they weren't exactly rolling in luxury. Their hunger bled into the record. They weren't just making an album, they were clawing their way into the rock and roll pantheon. Elektra, for their part, didn't even bother promoting the album. No major ads, no big publicity push. The label did not see the vision, but the fans did. And interestingly enough, I came up during that time, and Mötley Crüe was the first band that we ever saw on regular TV running commercials. And it had clips of Looks That Kill. So here are these guys completely clad in makeup with this loud, brash metal music, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs, and we were like, what the hell is this? And it was through those kinds of unconventional advertising methods that Shout at the Devil exploded. It was dangerous, controversial, exactly what kids in the suburbs wanted. Mötley Crüe had arrived, and they were not going anywhere. Now, before the money started rolling in, Mötley Crüe were already living like rock stars, scraping by in a whirlwind of booze, coke, whatever cheap thrills they could find. After remastering Too Fast for Love, their day-to-day existence still felt like a tightrope act between starvation and excess. They were still close enough to the gutter to remember what it felt like to be broke, still hungry enough to push every boundary just to get noticed. Every small victory, scoring free drinks, crashing at somebody's place instead of a rat-infested apartment, scamming their way into a club, felt like a step towards something bigger. And that desperation fueled them. It made them reckless. They weren't just a band trying to make it. They were a gang looking for trouble. Like every night might be their last. Mötley Crüe's lifestyle wasn't just about indulgence. It was a statement. If they were going to be famous, they sure as hell were not going to do it quietly. They drank like it was their job, snorted lines until the room blurred, and treated sex like it was an endurance sport. This wasn't just youthful stupidity. It was actually calculated chaos. They wanted to be the most outrageous, the band that every parent feared and every kid idolized. And their self-indulgence wasn't just a side effect of success, it was all part of the plan. The drugs weren't there for fun, they were the fuel. The fights weren't just drunken mishaps, they were badges of honor. Everything about this group was designed to provoke, and provoke they did. When they rolled into Edmonton International Airport looking like they just stepped off the set of Mad Max, customs officers were not amused. The spiked leather, the chains, the whole menacing image, it was enough to get them detained on sight. And instead of trying to talk their way out of it, they leaned into it. The arrest, the headlines, the outrage, it was all part of the legend. And the record label, always quick to exploit controversy, turned it into a selling point. Mötley Crüe wasn't just a band, they were a rock and roll crime scene just waiting to happen. And then there was Vince Neil, who took things a step further by trying to board a flight with a suitcase full of nudie magazines. Whether he thought he could get away with it or not, he just didn't care. It was just beside the point. The shock factor was priceless. These weren't the kinds of stories you had to fabricate for marketing. This was just their life. Behind the scenes, though, the cracks were already forming. The constant stream of excess, drugs, women, fights, arrests, wasn't just an act, it was also starting to take a toll. They were burning through their own fuel faster than they could replenish it, living on adrenaline and defiance while their bodies begged for a break. But slowing down wasn't an option. They had something to prove, and if it killed them in the process, so be it. Elektra Records saw the madness and chose to harness it rather than rein it in. They weren't interested in polishing Mötley Crüe into a radio-friendly act. They wanted to sell the band as is, a dangerous, unpredictable force, a walking middle finger to decency. Instead of pushing glossy magazine covers or radio interviews, they let the band's headlines do the work. Arrests, overdoses, trashed hotel rooms, every scandal was just another ad for Shout at the Devil. The band, in turn, leaned in even harder. They weren't looking to clean up for commercial appeal. They wanted to take what Too Fast for Love started and crank it up to 11. They weren't interested in writing a hit album. They were about to drop a bomb. Mötley Crüe walked into Cherokee Studios in April 1983 with the swagger of a band that had already outgrown the Hollywood clubs, but the reality was they had never recorded in a real professional studio before. Too Fast for Love had been a DIY affair, really cheap, cranked out like a greasy fast food burger, but this was something entirely different. Cherokee wasn't some dingy back alley operation. It was a full-fledged recording facility, the kind of place where serious albums got made. For a band built on reckless abandon, the structured environment of a professional studio was both an upgrade, but also a challenge. Gone were the days of bashing out songs in a single chaotic take. Now they had time, money, and an actual producer to help shape their sound. Whether they liked it or not, this was a new level and they had to adapt. Tom Weirman, their producer, knew right away that he was dealing with a band that was not used to the finer points of making a record. Their natural sound was unvarnished, but Tom wasn't about to let them charge into the studio like they were playing a live show. He explained how this process worked. No need for all of them to record at once, no need for rushed takes. Each member would lay down their parts individually with plenty of time to refine, tweak, tweak, even redo entire sections if necessary. This wasn't about losing energy, it was about harnessing it. The band had never worked this way before, but if they wanted to make an album that could stand up against the big leagues, they had to trust the process. So in terms of Tom's production style, he knew exactly how to push the record's intensity. One of his tricks was layering Vince Neil's vocals, bringing in professional studio singers to subtly double his parts, giving them that extra weight and depth that Neil's natural voice sometimes lacked. And he also tweaked the mix in ways designed to make the album sound even more ominous. Deep in the title track, there's a hidden overdub, barely perceptible, where Six and Tommy Lee can be heard chanting, "Jesus is Satan." It's buried just enough that it doesn't jump out, but it's there. A little Easter egg that added a bit of fuel to the controversy that would follow. But despite the band's wild reputation, the recording itself wasn't a mess of overdoses and fistfights. If anything, the controlled studio setting forced them into this kind of discipline that they were just not used to. The decision to record parts separately wasn't about keeping them from killing each other. It was just the most efficient way to get the job done. And because of all of that, they managed to capture something real. Shout at the Devil wasn't just a louder, sharper version of Too Fast for Love. It was something darker, meaner, more deliberate. Proof that even Mötley Crüe and all their reckless glory could thrive in a controlled burn. Mick Mars wasn't a guitarist obsessed with flash. His playing had this guttural, no-frills aggression that anchored Mötley Crüe's sound from day one. During the Too Fast for Love era, he leaned heavily on that 1972 custom Gibson Les Paul, thick, heavy beast of a guitar that gave his playing that street-level punch. It wasn't the type of guitar you typically associate with LA's glam metal scene. It had more in common with the blues rock players of the 70s. But Mars knew the sound and feel he was going for and didn't give an absolute shit about any of the trends. He never fell into the whole shredder thing. He wasn't what many guitar purists would call a virtuoso. But what he did have was tone, attitude, and the ability to make the guitar sound massive. And that Les Paul became such a key part of his early sound that it eventually ended up in a Hard Rock Cafe in Florida, enshrined as part of the band's early history. So when the Shout at the Devil sessions hit, Mars had actually expanded his arsenal, adding this handful of tools to the lineup. Les Paul was still there, but now he was also rotating between a Gibson Flying V with a custom black pickguard, a BC Rich Warlock, and a Guild Flying Star. And each guitar had its own character, its own bite. The Flying V gave him that jagged metallic attack that suited the album's darker, more aggressive sound. The Warlock, with its sharp angles, sinister look, was practically designed for Shout at the Devil's aesthetic, and it just had to make its way into the videos. The Guild Flying Star, a lesser-seen oddity, found its way into the lineup as well, though like many of his guitars, it either ended up broken or disappeared over time. Mars was never a real collector the way a lot of other players did. He pretty much just used them, abused them, and moved on. Mötley Crüe also thrived on rhythm. These dirty, locked-in grooves that almost kind of felt like they were going to fall out of the groove, but never would do that. And it made the songs feel meaner and tougher than the more polished contemporaries. They tracked the foundation of Shout at the Devil, and for that part of it, they did it the way a real rock band should. The drums and the bass just live in the studio. Nicky and Tommy kicking out that rhythm section. And Lee, who was always hungry for the next big thing, experimented with new drum tech at the time. And this included actually introducing samples. And a lot of this brought a crisp, percussive punch to the mix. And Six's bass, when he actually still truly played the bass, though never flashy, was deep and distorted, filling in the low end with a thundering weight that made the guitars feel even heavier. The album kicks off with a short but potent spoken word piece. In the beginning, a 73-second introduction that immediately sets the stage for the sinister and rebellious tone of this album. Rather than opting for a bombastic instrumental opener, Mötley Crüe instead drops listeners into this dystopian monologue delivered by British engineer Jeff Workman, credited under the pseudonym Alistair Fiend. His voice, heavily processed and dripping with this mechanized growl, speaks of a crumbling world, calling upon the strong to rise and fight back. And the track ends with the proclamation, "Be strong and shout at the devil." And of course, this seamlessly bleeds right into the album's first proper song. And bam, it is on. The title track, Shout at the Devil, wastes no time, roaring in with this jagged, fist-pumping intensity. Clocking in at 3 minutes and 16 seconds, it thrives on these gang vocals, relentless riffage, delivering a fist-pumping anthem designed to rally the misfits and the outcasts. And those verses of the song hit really heavy, with Vince just screaming over the top. And then some of Mick Mars's legendary double stop bends and some wild legato rounded out perfectly. And of course you get the backwards message in there, which just set everybody off. It was a sheer spectacle, and it really started out the album just right. And then of course they kick in with Looks That Kill, 4-minute tune that quickly became one of their defining hits. Those guitars in that thing are like buzzsaws, double tracked over one of Tommy's legendary 4-on-the-floor beats. And Vince Neil's voice was just pure metal on there. Sneering, high range. But what also makes this track sound so cool is Mick Mars' choice of chords, especially during the chorus, because he's creating this kind of melodic tension that really lent itself very well to counterbalance the more hard-hitting, menacing verses. And of course, this was the video that hit MTV. This was the video that hit all those regular TV stations once upon a time. And this was the song and video that got people going, what the hell is this? The video was this over-the-top production shot at A&M Records in Los Angeles, and it turned the band into larger-than-life figures. It was an 18-hour shoot complete with apocalyptic visuals, a sword-wielding warrior princess played by model Wendy Berry. And Berry had later actually said that despite their whole reputation for excess, the group was actually really laid back and easy to work with. And then came Bastard, a track that packed just under 3 minutes, and it would soon find itself in the crosshairs of Tipper Gore's PMRC. This one is a hard rocker, a nice aggressive beat going on, full-on 4/4 all the way, and the song was flagged as one of the most dangerous tracks of the decade. And Mick Mars later clarified that the song wasn't a call for bloodshed. It was just a big middle finger at somebody that the band felt had wronged them. But once the controversy machine got going, the pearls started getting clutched really, really, really hard. Mötley Crüe only strengthened their outlaw reputation with this one. Before launching into the album's lone cover, the band delivered a brief instrumental, God Bless the Children of the Beast. More interlude than a standalone track, the 93-second piece showcased Mick Mars in a different light, swapping out his usual grit for something more melodic, almost ethereal. Some listeners liked it to the eerie chiptune tones of an old Nintendo game. A strange but fitting detour before diving into the next act of Shout at the Devil. Covering the Beatles was an unexpected move, considering that Nikki Sixx once dismissed the band as fucking wimpy. But Helter Skelter wasn't just any Beatles song. It was the one where Charles Manson had twisted into the soundtrack for his cult's blood-soaked madness. By choosing to record it, Mötley Crüe doubled down on the album's flirtation with darkness. Crüe's version was leaner, meaner, stripped of the Beatles' psychedelic chaos in favor of something a lot more harsher and in your face. Just over 3 minutes, it wasn't the most ambitious cover, but it worked, especially in context of the album's aggressive, confrontational nature. Red Hot was pure speed, a 320 blast of unfiltered energy that kept the album's second half charging forward. Co-written by Sixx, Mars, and Neil, the song was a showcase for Tommy Lee, who attacked the drums with almost inhuman force. It was loud, fast, and relentless. Total shot of adrenaline. And then they go into Too Young to Fall in Love, leaning more into accessibility without losing the edge. And this is another one that features Tommy's 4-on-the-floor beat. And for people who don't know what that is, that basically just means hitting that kick drum on quarter notes. So it almost gives it like kind of what we would know now as like a dance groove. At 3 minutes and 34 seconds, this was one of the album's most radio-friendly cuts, pushing the band into wider commercial territory. And lyrically, it was about themes of youthful recklessness, but the real magic was in its balance. Chicks dug it, guys dug it, it just worked. And then came Knock 'Em Dead Kid, a song born from a real-life street fight that left Nikki Sixx bruised, bloodied, and in police custody. During an encounter outside a club, Nikki swung his chain belt at a Hell's Angel, not realizing that the biker was actually an undercover cop. The ensuing beatdown landed him with a broken cheekbone and a black eye, but he took the lemons and made lemonade out of them via these lyrics. The words bristle with the same defiance, snarling through themes of revenge and survival. 10 Seconds to Love was actually a bit of a longer tune, shifting gears to a more down in the groove, seductive, more restrained vibe, but still keeping the high energy. It played with contrast, danger, romance, intensity, and melody, showing that the band wasn't just blunt force aggression. And of course, it's got the hidden meaning. 10 Seconds to Love, pull my trigger, my gun's loaded with your love. Yeah, we know where that one's going. And closing out the track was Danger, a track unlike anything else on the album. It had more of an eerie ballad-like quality. It was actually kind of more reflective than anything. with its repeated lines, "You're in danger when the boys are around," "This is Hollywood." It wasn't quite a power ballad, not in the traditional sense, but it hinted at something more ominous beneath the band's reckless exterior. Definitely an interesting track to round out the album. So when Shout at the Devil dropped in 1983, it didn't take long for critics to sink their teeth into it. Robert Christgau, never one to hold back his absolute hatred for metal, dismissed the album in the Village Voice, calling it weak, even by heavy metal standards. He saw it as nothing more than empty bravado, posturing with no real substance. Rolling Stone took a pretty similar view, labeling it formulaic, accusing it of pandering to teenagers looking for cheap thrills. And even in 2004, all that time later, Rolling Stone never softened their stance on it. They kept waving it off as a watered-down mix of Kiss and Aerosmith cliches, barely worth the ink that it was printed on. And mainstream rock critics weren't the only ones losing their minds over the album. Pearl-clutching watchdogs, Christian groups latched onto the Shout at the Devil like it was proof of the coming apocalypse. It had that pentagram on the cover, dark lyrical themes, a song literally called Bastard, and it was the perfect storm for moral panic. And Tipper Gore really zeroed in on Bastard as part of the war on explicit content, throwing it onto their hit list of dangerous songs corrupting America's youth. Churches denounced it, televangelists warned of its satanic influence, and record stores and much more conservative towns quietly refused to stock it. But every bit of outrage only made kids want it more. Commercially, the album just exploded. In just 2 weeks, it sold 200,000 copies, which is an absurd number for a band that was still clawing its way into the mainstream. Hit number 17 on the Billboard 200, Fueled by Looks That Kill, which that song alone made it to number 54 on the Hot 100. Too Young to Fall in Love hit number 90. The title track climbed to number 30 on the mainstream rock chart. The album kept selling. Gold by January of 84, platinum in less than a month, double platinum by early 85, quadruple platinum by 1997. So critics may not have liked it, but the numbers definitely did not lie. And time, as it turned out, would be pretty kind to Shout at the Devil. AllMusic called it the best thing Mötley Crüe ever did. Pure sleazy, dangerous, and somehow still fun. And really, the album's legacy didn't stop at sales or nice criticism. Shout at the Devil became the template for an entire movement. It really opened the floodgates of the hair metal bands that dominated half of the 80s. Poison, Cinderella, Skid Row, countless others. All of varying quality, we will definitely all agree. But it made such a huge impact, and the sound, the image, the attitude, it all fed directly into what glam metal became. And the early critics may not have seen it coming, but Shout at the Devil didn't just define Mötley Crüe's rise. It actually helped shape the decade itself. I have covered Mick Mars himself in depth, and I went ahead and linked to his video. Make sure to check that out in the description. To my subscribers, thank you so much. You fine folks are definitely a finicky bunch. Still can't figure out what the hell you love sometimes. But that's why I think you're awesome, because you're always keeping me guessing. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to this channel, make sure you turn around, take that butt of yours, and go smack it right into the like button as hard as you possibly can. Move it a little over to the left there, and go ahead and have your butt hit that like button as well, and join the family. And I want to thank you so much for watching.